How is everybody doing for episode 2 of the Non-Standard Podcast? Now, again, this is going to be the first full episode that I've done, and this is with my buddy Manuel Colomba. He is an Army recruiter currently right now and an official 11 Bravo in the Army. We got to know each other as he moved to Abilene with his spouse, who works at Dallas Air Force Base, and we have been doing a lot of rucking events together, a lot of physical events together. So that's how we bonded. We bonded through physically hard things. We've done the Baton Death March, which was a 26.2 ruck with 35 pounds in the Missile of White Sands together. We've done, I think he helped me on 4x4x48. We've done plenty of other events here. But anyways, in this episode, we dive into some of the Army forms of leadership, how they are bred that ethos very early in their career. We talk about the Air Force's form of leadership. Then we go into my leadership philosophy, where he goes into what he thinks each line is, which is a good conversation there. Then we dive into some of my leadership traits that I email him, and he picks and chooses which one he wants to talk about. And then we go into a book reference at the end as well. So that's how my flow is going to go. It'll be a quick little intro with him. We'll talk about some leadership philosophies, and then we'll go into some leadership traits and then a book, hopefully that you guys learn something in general, and then you can share and provide and add those toolboxes to your trait later on down the road. So with that being said, let's get into this episode of some amazing non-standard leadership. All right, my man, we are getting ready to dive into this. This is going to be fun. I'm nervous. I'm actually pretty nervous. We did a fun trial run with my son, and it didn't go over too well, only because it was hard to treat him like a person like I would really have on the show. It was very much as me spitballing questions, and my wife was like, no, this isn't going to work. Just jump right into it with people who you're going to run it with. And I'm like, all right, perfect. I got this. So let's do this. We're going to start off really quick with the 3H philosophy. And then you were the one that brought this to me. So take a couple minutes and explain, and you don't have to go into full details on how you heard about it, but what you thought about it. And then I'll sort of say why I like it too. So we're going to start with the 3H's, and what are they?
All right, so my 3H's first one's hometown. I'm originally from Guayama, Puerto Rico. It's a small town, southeast coast of Puerto Rico, about 130,000 people. So not too big, not too small, pretty decent size. Hero, I really like the underdog stories. So like for me, it'd be like a Mike Tyson, because I respect people who have a straight shot to the top, but I respect even more people who fail and rise to the top. So that's probably why I'd pick him. And hardship. So obviously being going on almost 13 years in this career in the military, there's a lot of hardships, but I think the biggest one for me was the time that my wife was in basic training, tech school, when she decided to join. I was stationed in Hawaii, and all of a sudden I'm in the Pacific with a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old. And 6-7 months of that was pretty rough.
Yeah, so for those of you guys, the 3H's is a pretty cool introduction or just get to know somebody. So I took this from Colomba because he heard it. He got asked it from somebody else just 2 weeks ago? You were doing an interview here at Dias, and the person asked you right away the 3H's, and you told me about it right after. I was like, dude, I'm taking that. And for most of you guys out there that are wondering, my leadership traits that I have procured are not just brain nuggets I have thought of out of thin air. I have procured them from people, and I wrote that down, and I think that is now number 28 for me in my leadership trait is the 3H's. So if you guys are wondering on how to get to know somebody new and you don't know what questions to ask or you want to change it up, I think the 3H's are huge because, one, you bring up where they're from, right? So you're getting to know them a little bit personally. Hey, maybe you have something in relation there. And you can change it up. You can be like hometown to now, sort of like a career progression. And then the heroes is cool because it gives you a perspective of who they idolize. Because being in the military, we may not idolize military people. I don't idolize military people. I actually idolize the sports athletes. I grew up a sports fan. So my heroes would be I'm a huge Jason Kidd fan. Jason Kidd is one of my idols when it comes to sports and role models because he played the game very unselfishly as a point guard. He wasn't known for scoring. He wasn't known for anything flashy. He was a good assist guy. and he helped team win. So that's one of my heroes. Um, I haven't really, like, and I'm a sports guy, so I think Kobe is a huge one as well out there. He's got some good philosophies, and and your heroes can change throughout too. So I think that's cool. And then the hardship is obviously good because when you're building rapport with new people or you're getting to know somebody that you may be working for, it's always good to understand some of the hardships they've had. And sometimes a family separation is definitely going to be a tough hardship thing. So with the hardship, we talk about the family stuff. Let's go. Let's dive into sort of that career that you were talking about. So, like I said in the intro, Columba's in the Army. I'm in the Air Force, and I have very much, I say, fallen in love with the Army's ethos of leadership. I've had some experience working in Army places. I worked over at Sumter in South Carolina, where our cent is, so I got to work with some Army people there. I say I've worked with Colombo for the past 3 years, even though technically we've never like worked together. It's all like fitness wise, but I've been able to see the leadership style you guys have. And I've also learned a lot about the Army leadership almost through social media because it's really cool to be able to gain that perspective as well. So, Columba, take me through your career. Let's go a little bit at the beginning on the Army's ethos for leadership and how that has sort of helped you develop in your path, which, is pretty much non-standard too, because, not everybody in the Army gets to be a recruiter or end up there. So let's hit that a little bit.
All right, so my career started in 2011. I joined the reserves as a 68 whiskey combat medic. I graduated high school. 2 weeks later, I was in basic training. I turned 18 in basic training. After that, I went to Fort Sam Houston, completed the medical training. I went back to Puerto Rico, did a year and a half of college, and then I decided to go active duty, and that's where I reclassed into infantry. And then since August 2013 to now, well, not now because now I'm doing recruiting, but yeah, I've been an infantryman.
So for some of the people who are new listening to maybe the military's perspective, what does the Army teach you at a younger age about leadership? I'm curious as well. So like, where does it come from? Where,
So
what's it like?
from our previous conversations, like I've realized that the responsibilities are really different. The Air Force gives really young people the responsibility of really expensive equipment. The Army gives the responsibility of other people to really young people. So as a 18, 19-year-old, once you become a team leader, you're in charge of a fire team. That's 4 guys. That's 4 lives that you're in charge of. Everything that has to do with those guys, because they're probably like a year younger or two younger, but you don't know what their background is. Like some kids show up and they don't even know how to do laundry. Others show up and they're self-sustaining. So others show up with families and they still can't take care of themselves. So you have to be like that life coach at a really young age. So that's like hitting the ground running.
Yeah, and then so I'll tag to the Air Force's perspective of leadership at a young career wise. So obviously, since I was enlisted as well, like you said, the Air Force doesn't really teach us how to lead others at a young part in our career. It's more of like leading tasks, leading jobs, leading, like you said, working with very high valuable things that develops leadership there. So we're put in charge of a lot of technical things at a young age, and that's sort of how the enlisted force structure is directed in the Air Force. Is you're doing a job to become a better leader, which is weird, right? Like, how am I supposed to be a better leader by doing a job? That's not leadership. It's like working, right? Like, that's your job. So the Air Force teaches leadership about focusing on doing a task very well, and then you develop from there. But it sounds like in the Army, you're working with people at that younger age, but then you guys are still all trying to accomplish one common task. So I think that's pretty cool. Now, like you said, you don't get to know these people pretty well, right? So how does that work when you're in charge of these people? How do you
So
develop them?
you get to know people pretty quick. It's kind of like a toxic culture trait. Once you come in, like you're not received as, "Hey, buddy, welcome to the team." You're put into the fire pit immediately. Like you are the new guy, and everybody's gonna let you know that you're the new guy, and you're gonna be doing everything that nobody else wants to do. And how you perform in that situation is gonna let everybody else know how you perform. and
Nice.
that's going to
Okay.
be your make or break, honestly.
Yeah, that's crazy because just like I said in the Air Force, man, we're thrown into a job, and so like that's we all work together, and like that's what you're going to do right away. And we are more focused on each person completing a task to get to the next level. We're not necessarily focused on working like you said as a team to accomplish this task. So, um, yeah. So when did you start to develop some of those? So where do you go after that? Where do you go after that small fire team?
So I bounced around in between weapon squad and the vehicles for the beginning of my career. So right off the bat, I show up, I get assigned as an RTO. That's a really technical job, and I was not proficient at it. So let's just say that path didn't last more than a month. They put me into a different job, where I think like I found my true passion, and I was in the weapon squad. So weapon squad in the infantry, it's split up into two gun teams and two anti-tank teams. So I was a 240 gunner, and that is something that I fell in love with. That's where my passion went. Like I knew that 240 inside and out, and like just by firing the weapon, like I could know what's wrong with it. Like it got to the point where like that was it. Like me and the gun, and then the constant training because we're doing two training rotations a year, so we're in the field in and out constantly throughout the year. Like it got to the point where like I didn't even have to unpack my ruck. Like I'd get home, I had the sustainment pouch. That's where the dirty socks and the dirty t-shirts were. I'd wash those, throw them back in there, wash the uniform I was wearing, throw it back in there. My ruck was ready to go back into the field. Like it's a lot of reps, but that gets you really sharp when you're doing one job for a really long period of time.
Yeah, I've read about that in some of the books I've read about for Army training, right? You guys train a lot for combat, like tons of training, like real world training, specific task training, which is like, man, it's pretty different than in the Air Force. Like
And
one thing that I thought was interesting what you just said is you're able to switch jobs to find something that you were better at. Now, in the Air Force, we don't have that luxury, man. Like you've probably seen it with your spouse, right? Like when they're in a job, that's their job. So if they're having a hard time, they either have to get better
that's it.
or they get better, man. Like you
Yeah.
can't, or I like when I was an airman doing SEER, if I wasn't good at SEER, I couldn't go, oh, I'm just going to go do weather or something like that. Like I had to embrace the suck and either like get really good at it or I don't know, like
I
I'd
guess
get reclass. Just
that's a really
yeah,
good like an interesting thing about the infantry platoon is that there's a lot of different jobs within the platoon. So a lot of people are like, "Oh, infantry." Well, first of all, infantry split up in two different jobs: 11 Bravo, 11 Charlie. Uh, you're an infantryman or you're in direct fire infantryman, which is the guy behind the infantry platoon shooting the mortars. And then within the infantry platoon, you have the radio guy, you have the assault squads, you have the weapon squads. With the assault and they're the same as the maneuver squads. Each fire team is going to have different jobs. You have the grenadier, you have the saw gunner, you have the team leader, you have the rifleman. Um, in the weapon squad, you have the gun team leader, you have the ammo bearer, you have the machine gunner, and then you also have the forward observer, which is the guy calling the rounds in. Um, you also have the medic, he's attached to weapon squad, and you have the guys with the anti-tank, which could be Gustav, AT4, man pads, any small rockets, pretty much.
I feel like I should have explained all this before I started reading about Face. So obviously I'm reading about Face right now, and he talks so much about like literally what you're talking about, like all these different units and
Yeah,
fire brigades and all that. And I'm like, oh my god, I should have had like an Army 101 going into this book
yeah,
so I can understand. But I think what I see in that is more chances to lead at
yeah,
a very
absolutely, a lot.
younger
And
level.
that's a good thing that like I like about that environment is that like they're not focused on like politically correct. They're not focused on anything. It's pretty much like, are you good at your job? Okay. Can you teach others how to do your job? Okay, then you're in charge. Oh, this guy's PCSing. You're next one up. That's it. Like you don't like. There's not a chance to like. Oh yeah, let me get ready to be a team leader. Like you have to know one level down, one level up at all times. Because even in training, uh, squad leader's out, team leader, take charge of the squad,
Yeah,
and you're like,
Yeah, it's something I've
Holy
noticed. And
smokes, what is this? Like it's
I love
the
the one up, one down concept, man.
yeah.
Because in the Air Force, we don't have that at our flight level of working, right? Like you don't have that chance. So like, let's just say an A1C, right? An E2 um, is doesn't have that chance to do one up, one down in their leadership. They're just at that specific 3-level or 5-level job, and that's it for like a year and a half until they become proficient, and then they move up. But it's not as flexible as a one up or one down that you guys talk about. And I think that's why, from what I've seen, as I learn about leadership, I'm like, man, it's just it's different. And you guys have those experiences. So what we're going to dive into is really quick. I want to ask a question. How do you know someone is not necessarily a good leader, but being a good leader? So we know what a good leader is, but how do you know it's getting done? What do you see below them that shows it? So like if you wanted to prove you're being a good leader, how would you be able to tell?
Take me out of the equation, take out the leader and see how the team performs.
Oh, dang, dude. I thought I would throw you off guard, man. Not at all.
Yeah. You do
That
that,
is
you're gonna recognize like a good performing team real quick.
yes, yeah. There's a bunch of good sayings, right? So like you should be always training your replacement, right? That should be a goal for a lot of us in a leadership position. If we leave for the day, the job shouldn't fail. There should be people able to pick up and move. That I like that, man. So to know you're doing your job well, if you were to leave or just not show up, the job still gets done. Um, yeah, that's huge because I've definitely been in plenty of situations where if a boss is late or an NCO is late, everybody's sort of just like, all
Okay, what are
right,
we doing, guys?
what are we doing today? But it should be instilled in them like, hey, like Captain so-and-so here or Sergeant so-and-so is not here. Like, hey, we know the job, guys. Let's just go do it. Get it done, get moving. And so that if he does show up or when they do show up, it's taken care of. And you're sort of helping them out as well, right? You're not leaving them to pick up all the slack or work harder later.
Stay proactive, not reactive.
Yes, yes, and proactive is always hard, I think, as a leader because then you always think you have to play. You're playing catch up, right? Like, I think a lot of leaders fall into that reactive leadership because it's easy. You sort of wait for something to happen, and then you have your chance to lead. But to be proactive, I think for young leaders is hard because that's where micromanaging might come in, right?
Yeah.
A proactive leader may be micromanaging too much because they're trying to get out there and tell everybody what to do, make sure they're doing it right. And that's a fine balance. Micromanaging is definitely tough. But with that being said, one of the things I wanted to talk about that I'm trying to learn on is a leadership philosophy. And I think this is something that's going to have to change in the military when it comes to commands. And we've had this talk before where a commander will get into a squadron and they will give them their priorities, right? Like what the squadron should fix. And it happens a lot with base commanders. I say on the Air Force side, like squadron commanders and op group commanders, where you'll get a list from them of like, hey, we need to fix these 2 tasks in these 2 years and then get a change. Is there anything like that on your guys' side when you get, I guess, new brigade commanders or
Yeah,
I'm not
absolutely.
lingo, but
So for us, it'd be like battalion commander, brigade commander level. Like once those guys switch out, we're gonna get the commander's intent, their philosophy, their vision, and depending on who it is, like I've had battalion commanders that they would publish that. Like it's print out posters at every company, battalion, building, everywhere. Like they make sure that everybody's tracking. This is what I want to focus on, and let's get after it. Others, not so much, but we're at that weird phase in the military that I think we have like all the early 2000 guys on their way out the door, but then we have the 2010 guys who are like halfway through their careers. So it's like it's only 10 years, but it's a huge difference on like a mindset thing on how we approach things. Like we all realize, even in the army, that doing push-ups when you do something wrong, it's not always the answer. So there's a lot of adapting and there's a lot of like clashing right now because some guys want to stay old school, others want to fit into like the newer generation. And then there's us, we're like stuck in between. We're like the hybrid ones. Like we're raised in the military by those like invasion veterans, but now those guys are gone. So the mindset has completely changed. So
yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I'm doing that bridge that gap. Like me and you are that middle ground. We grew up with the hard ass leaders of, hey, dude, I'm just gonna go out and smoke you if you mess up today. And you know, that's very job dependent too. I had a job like that. You had a job like that, where
It builds
that's what
character.
yeah, it works. It definitely has it, and that's why I think it's cool because those leaders, I think that's all they relied on. Like that was their toolbox, right? Like you could shake their toolbox around, and there may be two things in there. One's going to be physical punishment, and one's going to be probably like a
UCMJ.
ridicule punishment. Yeah, or just like a legit punishment. But now we are establishing, you know, that toolbox has to be a lot more full. Because it's just not working with the younger generation now. Um, and so, yeah, and that's why I'm huge on just a philosophy for everybody to have so that they have a way of work. And you mentioned it too. You said some of your brigade people do give a philosophy. What are some leadership philosophies you've seen them give? Because it's not the what they want done, it's how they want it done, right?
Yeah.
So what are some of the things you've heard on some hows from their leadership philosophies? And then I'll go into mine and we'll talk about that.
All right. So I'm gonna hit two real quick that have impacted me, like from the day I heard them from those leaders, and I'll say their names. One of them, Command Sergeant Major Blyler, who was my first sergeant in Able Company 49. His philosophy was pretty simple. He kept it dummy proof. All you got to do is care. As long as you care, everything else will fall into place. And
Yes.
then I worked at the battalion shop, like land and ammo. That's the guys that coordinate the training, get the munitions, get the land we're going to be training at for the battalion level. And our battalion commander, Colonel Turner, his philosophy was the attitude is a force multiplier. Like, it doesn't matter how bad things are going, that man always had a smile on his face and he always had a positive outlook. Every morning, he would walk into a shop. How's it going, gang? And we'd crack jokes at it because we thought it was funny, but he would get us to smile just by doing that. And like once you get everybody to smile and you get everybody in a better uh, mindset,
Yeah.
then the day goes by a lot smoother.
Yeah, that's cool, man. Yeah, so we'll jump into mine. So, and then I want you to feel free to discuss it, and then we'll discuss them, and then we'll move on. So, I have 4 steps to my leadership philosophy, and I use them in this order. So you have to do the first one to move on to the next one. You've already heard me say before, but for everybody
Yeah.
else out there, it's leading by example in all we do. To be selfish, you have to be selfish. Build relationships based on trust and care. So you mentioned care from before. And then challenge the road in front of you by getting comfortable, being uncomfortable. So that would be my leadership philosophy if I were to take charge. Now, I would change it up. I would not give a task to a squadron. So, for instance, if I were to become a squadron commander in the Air Force, which would be my next leadership position in the military hierarchy, right? From a major to usually lieutenant colonel, you work DO to squadron commander at the lowest level, which is a squadron. Most squadron commanders will give you priorities for the squadron. I would not. When I get there, if I do, I will not give my squadron the task to change. I will give them a little philosophy on how to get it done so they know what has to be done and they can accomplish it. Obviously, you know, if you follow First Form or if you know Andy Frisella, like that's where they come from. And I tell a lot of people, man, like the leadership philosophy here is not from the military, which is crazy. Like being in the military going on like 16 years, I have procured some of these in the past 3 years, being surrounded by those in the First Form community because they push me just as much. But I know they will apply to the military. So that's what's cool about leadership stuff is it's not just in the military, it's everything else we do. So out of those 4, let's just hear what you think about it, you know, and yeah, what's your perspective?
All right. So the first one in leading by example and all we do, I think it's a great one because it's not just how you perform at work, it's how you carry yourself, it's how you present yourself, which a lot of people try to think of it as, I don't know, egotistic or whatever, but I'm a firm believer that the way you carry yourself and the way you portray yourself from like your uniform to your fitness, like that goes to show a lot about you and how much you care about the job. Because somebody who shows up early, who shows up ready to go with a clean uniform, like right off the bat, I'm like, okay, this guy's ready to go. Um, Other than that, uh, to be selfless, you have to be selfish. That's one thing that I've worked on this specifically this past year and a half, because I'm like all over the place and I want to do a million things at once, but I really have to get myself in check before I execute other tasks. Because if
Yeah.
not, then nothing's gonna get done and everything's gonna fail. So
Yeah, that's just the hard part. And overall, I think a lot of people think to be a good leader, they have to do a lot. I think
no,
that's a huge misconception. A lot of people think to be leaders have to be really busy. They have to be doing like 1,000 things. They have to be good at, the jack of all, master of none sort of thing. Um, but if you could just be good at one thing and be very good at that, it is going to help establish yourself as a leader, because somebody is going to know you can do something very well and consistent for a long time. And then while you're working on that, you can start doing other things. Like we talk about the simple things, right? Like making your bed or just brushing your teeth or doing the dishes after you eat, which isn't even work related, right? Like we're not talking about like in
yeah.
the office, but we're just talking about things in general. And then it sort of ties into showing up at work at the same time every day. Um, Maybe it's how you structure your work emails or whatever, some of the little things like that. If you can balance all those things individually and not rush them, it'll tie into that being selfless before you can be selfish. And it's said in a lot of books, a lot of people won't follow somebody if that person just can't do the job, which is why you have to be selfish to be able to do it. And that's a huge one too. And that also goes, and that's why I love lead by example, because like you said, it doesn't apply to the workplace. It just applies in everything we do. It's, it's appearances do matter. I think it's definitely losing its focus and losing its priority in the military with appearances where, yeah, I think the military is doing a great job allowing people to be their own individual, but it's losing that respect and that, pride in how you look almost. We're sort of allowing ourselves to look lazy because
Yeah.
it's easier, and because there was a time in the military where you were prideful in having to shave your hair, or having to have a close trimmed mustache, or having to have iron starched uniforms because you did look. But then I understood, it did take time. Like I remember when I had to iron my BDUs, I was like, why do I have to do this every morning? Like why can't I just not iron my uniforms and go to work, which we've sort of moved into, but then now it's brought that lazier way of how we portray ourselves. So we need to find those areas where we still can. Yeah, so that's good there.
So I off of that one, like it's always gonna depend on the situation, right? Like my uniform is probably not gonna be the nicest looking one if I'm in the field. That's understandable because there's
Yeah.
other priorities. When I'm in garrison, when I'm on base, like I need to look the part because that goes to show that I care about my appearance. That goes to show like more than just like, okay, well he just got back from the field. Well, can you at least clean your boots? You can do that, like something simple. Uh, the next one on the list was build relationships based on trust and care. That is one that I really struggled with as a younger leader, as a younger NCO, because of the way I was raised in the military. Like nobody cared how I felt. This is the
Yeah.
job, we're getting it done, and that's what I learned. And after many failures, I realized like everybody has a different approach.
Yeah.
So some people work great just like me. Hey, this is what we're doing. Let's go. You have to tailor your leadership style to the people that are working with you.
Boom. That's it. That's probably my biggest leadership philosophy your leadership philosophy will never be the same wherever you go. It's always going to change.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I think we are taught in leadership that's wrong. Everybody's like, one way to lead is the only way to lead. Like if you're going to go command this weapons shop and then you're going to go command this, like radio shop, you're going to have to do the same leadership style. No, like that is the hardest thing to do as a leader because we're not good at it, right? Like I've had to adjust as well, working from different shops where like my leadership tactic wasn't going to work here. But instead of me enforcing my old leadership tactic on this new shop, which I was comfortable with, why am I uncomfortable doing a new leadership style to benefit this shop. I'm making 30 people change to my leadership style instead of one person change to 30 people's leadership style. Like, so I think that third bullet, the build relationships off trust and care, is like my new leadership style for the new millennials, right? Like that one probably wouldn't have worked like 10 years ago, like you're saying, like you would have just got to work and your boss would be like, dude, I don't care. Like, you got your dog died or whatever, like go do your
Nobody
job.
cares. Yeah.
I don't think you can do that anymore. It's harder because we know taking care of people at that level has such a bigger impact for them to do their job right.
Yeah, you hit it on. Yeah, right there.
We've seen the repercussion of that generation suffering through that type of leadership, becoming those stubborn NCOs and not caring now. Like that's who's sort of in the middle.
It's funny because like you grow up in the military. Oh, adapt and overcome. Oh, we're so adaptive, adaptability. And then when it comes down to dealing with people, we're not adaptable at all. But that's something that I've been working on, and hopefully, like other NCOs, other leaders, other officers in the military get to see that part. Like, you take care of a dude's family, and you make sure they're straight, their finances are in order, their family like healthcare is in order, and that guy is gonna work for you. You don't care. He's gonna be so distracted with everything he's got going on at home that he's not gonna perform.
Dude, exactly. It's a given. It's a non-negotiable. I've noticed in a lot of the issues I've seen in squadrons with like little things not doing right. If you were to ask the 5 whys, the last one is going to get to that airman not doing the job because nobody cared. Nobody cared that he was doing it right. His boss didn't care he was doing it right. His boss didn't care about him doing it, so he didn't put in the effort, or she, to get it done. If that person at the lowest level knows my supervisor cares that I get this job done, or cares because it may affect their job and they've told me that, or they know what I'm going through to get it done, they will put in the extra effort to make sure it's done right at their level. And then it won't spread up to a higher problem where that's what it boils down to. I guarantee 90% of any issue in a squadron can be fixed by just having a relationship with that person who made, because it's usually an individual mistake that is built up. Any problem we see in the military, if it's an equipment problem or a big problem, there's always something at the lowest level where this airman or this person messed up and it sort of had a trickle effect. And it's probably because that person just didn't do the job right because they didn't care. Because nobody cared about them to help them get done right. And yeah, now, so obviously my last one is just challenge the road in front of you, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable. So I could make this one really easy, right? Change. Go change things. But I tried to keep it vague, almost confusing, where people have to think about it. And that's why I have that one in there, so there's a little more thought to it. So yeah, what do you think?
That is definitely a tougher one to execute because anybody can say, yeah, it's challenge the road ahead. But once you're in that position, like for me, it was a huge culture shock coming from 10 years of infantry platoon lifestyle and getting thrown out into recruiting in the middle of nowhere. You saw me when I first got here. I was completely out of my element. Hey, I charged ahead. I had no clue what I was doing, but I went for it. But that is definitely something that when you're like in those uncomfortable situations, like you just got to go with the flow and just do your best. That's all you can do. Do your best. If you fail, then you try again. At least you showed up.
Yeah. Now, this is my lack of knowledge. Is the Army really big on changing things at the lower level, or are you guys very focused on just like what I'm tasked to do? I'm gonna go and just like crush it. Or do you guys have those opportunities to say like, hey, I don't think this is gonna work? Like what's that like?
Well, that one is definitely not taught. That is more self-taught, and that is something that we all have struggled with because you're bred into this job, right? And you go the one up, the one down, and you're always focused on that. But it's almost like that becomes like your own little world, your own little bubble. And then when you have to do something different, you're like, what do I do? And those around you are the same way. They were only bred in that environment. So all they know is that as well. Unless they've been like different jobs prior enlisted,
Yeah.
things like that. And that is like very rare to come across because not every commander you're gonna have is gonna be prior enlisted to know the struggles you face on a daily basis. Not every squad leader or weapon squad leader has spent years in the weapon squad because usually that position is like, okay, well, you're squad leader, the maneuver squad. Now you go up to the weapon squad. That doesn't mean you're going to be the most knowledgeable on weapons. You could spend your entire career in the maneuver squads and then be in charge of a weapon squad. So that's something that's definitely like learning on the fly most of the time.
How would you teach those at that younger level to want to challenge what they're doing without being arrogant, right? Without like having them question every task that they're told to do, right? So how do you know, like, how would you tell young Columba, like, hey, if there's something you think is dumb or could be done differently, how do you do it?
So one thing that I learned, and uh, it's worked pretty well. Uh, I encourage other people to give it a try. When you have a mission, right? Ask the team, how should we get this done? And I know Jocko's hit it on his books. Many other leaders have said it before, but like when you put it into execution, it's a lot different because you want to control the way that things are gonna go. Maybe from prior experience, you're like, okay, well, if we do this, this is gonna happen. But we get so caught up in looking good in front of the people in charge of us that we don't allow those guys that we're in charge of to make their own mistakes so they can learn from those.
Yeah, so the ability to fail, right? Like letting people know if they fail, it's fine. So they should want to challenge the road.
Hmm.
I think a lot of people are stuck with like if I propose a change or want to change something, it has to be done right. I can't mess up. So like that's it. If they think they're going to fail, they're sort of just like, ooh, I don't know if I want to do this. Um, and so letting your team know, like, hey, it's fine. Like let's just try something different or do what we got to do, or discuss it like you're saying and see if there's even a change that has to be done. Because sometimes we don't always have to challenge the road in front of us. If the road's running right, that's perfect. But sometimes there's either a faster car to go down that road or a smoother cement you can put on the road to make it go faster. You don't have to do a different turn, but there's definitely newer ways to go down that road. So
That is definitely like something that I don't know how the infantry is gonna approach because with like all the new technology we're getting, uh, our tactics are gonna have to change. Because
yep.
we're getting a lot of equipment and we're not employing it right because of that. Because nobody like wants to fail. So, for example, we got the little helicopters that go in the kit. That each squad has one. How do we employ those? Well, if we're gonna hit the objective, let's take a quick pause before we rush in. But that goes against everything we've been taught because we've always been taught violence of action, keep the momentum going, don't stop.
Yeah.
So that's two things that are going to counter each other. But do you want to know? What was that?
You got like fireworks back there?
I don't know what happened. My hands are over here. I swear I had nothing to do with the fireworks. But it's like two things clashing because it's two completely like opposite philosophies. You have violence of action, you have don't lose momentum, and then you have okay, how about we make a quick pause so we can throw these little helicopters out there. We can get eyes on the target, and then we can continue with that violence of action. So it's gonna be a lot of adapting, but that's where you can't be afraid to fail.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's one thing I think the Air Force has done pretty well is we use the term innovative, right? A lot. It's like the buzzword now in the military or in the Air Force. And so the young generation knows when they are tasked to do something, if they think it can be done differently or they can change it, they're not afraid. And I think that's with this new generation. They're definitely not afraid to question or want to change things. Um, but I think we've seen a lot of people want to change things because they don't want to do it the current way because it's harder. When I say harder, not like physically harder, but it can be mentally harder or more steps to get done. Um, and so yeah, there's definitely a fine line between wanting to change everything and then wanting to change some things. But yeah, so I also sent you a list of the rest of my leadership traits. So, like I've said before, for everybody who's listening, I have a book filled of up to 28 leadership traits that I have procured, and I add periodically as I read a bunch of books and talk to people as well. And I send an email out to everybody on the podcast to pick a few of them. We'll discuss them, and then we'll see how you listening can add those to your toolbox. So, Colomba, what do you got?
So the first one I picked is probably one of my biggest weaknesses: control time.
Oh, yeah.
I am terrible at controlling my time. I find myself spending a lot of time with like busy work and not actually the things that I need to get done. Maybe that's a
Yes, yeah.
procrastinator in me, but I'm like the hardest working lazy person, or vice versa, because I will clean my desk and I will organize my desk before I actually get to work. Um,
And then you're like, why did I just do this? I just spent like
but there
30
was
minutes doing
absolutely no
this. And
need
it
for
looks
it. But hey, it's clean. I did something. The second one that I picked was
so. What tips do you have for anybody? Unless you want to ask me on how, but do you have any tips on what people out there could do to add this leadership trait to their toolbox to control their
so
time? What do you
plan
have?
ahead,
Then I'll add a
plan
couple.
ahead, plan ahead, plan ahead.
Okay. Yep.
Number one. And two, that works for me. It looks kind of weird throughout the day. I have 20 alarms going off, but those are like my backstops. Like, okay, at this time, like this has to be done, or I'm gonna move on to the next task, and then I'll get back to that one
Yep.
later if I have to. So yeah, planning ahead. That's one good thing that I've learned from recruiting. We have to make like our weekly calendar of what we're doing by hour every day, every day.
Okay. Yeah.
So that sort of like gives structure to like, okay, well, I need to get this done. Obviously, once the week gets going, just like any mission, doesn't survive enemy contact. You're gonna be changing your
The
schedule.
enemy has a
Things
say,
are gonna
right?
come
I
up.
love that. I love that saying,
But
dude.
it is a good tool to have. The planning ahead and the setting the alarm so I don't forget things. Writing it down, old school.
Nice. And
I have a notebook and
yep. Yep.
this bad boy all the time, everywhere. Uh, it helps me because it helps me not forget about the things that I skipped. So, um,
Yeah, I'll add on that. Write and check off tasks. That's a huge thing. I'm a huge believer of. I have multiple calendars. I have handwritten calendars. I have calendars on my military laptop. I have calendars on my personal laptop. Um, and I check them off. And that's a huge thing. I think that'll help people as well when they're controlling their time on those time blocked assignments. Check them off when you're done to make sure before you move on to the next one. And that also leads me into don't focus on a daily schedule. It should be a weekly schedule or a monthly schedule so you don't get too overtasked with one day. Because there are probably tasks you can do throughout the week and still be successful in that week to where your day may not seem real busy and you may think it's unproductive, but you're getting 5 or 7 tasks done a day, right? And then over a week or a month, you win. You're not trying to cram a month's worth of tasks into one day to seem productive, but then you're going to forget a couple and it's going to have a trickle effect. So focus on a couple simple tasks a day, which we've heard multiple times on multiple podcasts. And then they will stack up throughout the week. So those are my two right there. All right, what else you got?
also on that one, before we move on to the next one, every morning after I get done with my workout or like while I'm on the Stairmaster in the sauna, I try to go over what my day is gonna be like. Because
Yes.
for some reason, that's like the sharpest time of the day. Some people is before bed, other people are good at adjusting throughout the day. For me, it's that one moment. And I figured out that that's it, so I try to stick to it because that's the one that works the best for me. Uh, the second one I have ties in two of them: be bold with risk and fail. So,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, we're going off with fireworks again.
There's got to be some word you're saying that launches those fireworks in the background. That's hilarious.
I'm gonna wait on them to die off. All right, here we go. So, um, when I reclassed into infantry, I was supposed to go to Special Forces assessment and selection. On the way, I failed out of airborne school. And for many reasons, I thought it was unjust, whatever. I was really bitter about it for a few years. And that mentality kept me from trying other things, kept me from going to schools, kept me from pursuing other things in my career. That now that I look back on it, I'm like, man, like I wasted 2, 3 years because I was so traumatized by this one failure that I didn't want to try anything else because I didn't want to fail again. And then
Yeah.
after that, an opportunity came up for like a school. I was absolutely not ready. All I got was the packing list. Hey, yeah, showtime's at 06. If you want to go, you can. And I was like, talked to my best friend. He's like, man, you should go. You should absolutely do it. I showed up. I made it through. And then it gave me like an itch for more. I was like, man, if I was able to crush this one with no preparation, like what can I do next? What can I do next? And that sort of like caused like this little momentum or like a snowball effect that I was able to progress quickly, like in a short period of time, because I got rid of that mentality of being afraid to fail. So taking the risk and failing. Those I
Yeah.
think we found out
Risk
the word
is a
fail.
risk is a huge leadership killer, because a lot of leaders are afraid to take risks, and that's because the leaders that got there never took risk. And I think that's where we see in a lot of the leaders, not just in the military, but in a lot of companies, or whatever. We're at that point, and I think in the world where the leaders now never had to take a risk to get there, and so now they're suffering because when they have to take a risk, they don't know what to do, or they're scared to do it. Um, so that's a huge one there. Yep, nice. What else?
Multiple angles of attack. I love that one. I never
Yeah,
saw it like from that perspective. Like obviously I've seen angles of attack, but I never put it into like a leadership thing. When you're gonna approach something, like approach it from all angles. Think of it like it's a battle, you know? Because at the end of the day, it is a battle. You're battling time, you're battling personal issues, you're battling manning, resources. So one perspective or like one experience that I've recently had was okay, what's going to be next in my career? And like we are saying earlier, instead of being reactive, I like to stay proactive. So I am going to try this. I'm going to try this. And whatever happens, happens. But at least I gave myself all the opportunities that I could.
yeah. And then what I have written down in my notebook under because under each trait I have sort of like a paragraph. It just says when leaders are given a task, one thing I've seen is they take one path to solve it and one path only. So again, it can be as simple as an email of a task where we want to go to get the job done. I've seen if you look for an answer to a problem from multiple angles, it may take longer to get there, but your solution is going to be a lot more effective. Now, in some situations, this might not apply, right? If you're in a stressful situation or time permitting, a 60% solution, you'll get the job done. But if the problem is not time permitting and you want a good solution, the easiest and quickest one isn't always the best. So that's why if you have a team like you talked about, if you have a team around you, feel free to take a couple days or an hours, send out that task to multiple people around you, get some feelers, see where they're thinking, and then bring it all together and brainstorm and put that in. So yeah, I think that's one that's hard for a lot of leaders, right? When we get tasked by somebody from our boss, we want to get done as soon as possible. So we're going to try to do exactly what we know what to do and exactly as fast as we can get done. And then we're going to tell that guy like, "Hey, sir, cool, it's all done." And then maybe like a day goes by and you're like, "Oh, I could have done this way better."
Yeah.
um, and that's yeah, and yeah, that's just a leadership thing that we have to learn overall. I've seen a lot of young airmen, have that problem as well, where maybe I'm tasking them something and they go get it done. And then I go, "Hey, did you think about this?" And they're like, even though it got done, um, taking those extra few potatoes and figuring out some different angles of attack can help too.
No is an answer. I kind of
Why
like
can't
that
I
one
tell
because
somebody no?
it's challenging. Like some people like me, like I am really set on it's a no now, but it will be a yes later. I try to figure out the 20 ways of getting that
That's
yes.
I like that. Yeah, no now, but a yes later. Yeah, that's not too bad. It's yeah.
Because sometimes, like, you'll ask for, okay, maybe I can't get this request now, but if I just wait on it and ask at a better time, maybe I'll get it. I had a first aunt, he's at the Sergeant Major school now, Sergeant Major Kidsmiller, and he taught me the squeaky wheel gets the oil.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't raise your concerns, if you don't say, hey, this is what we need, you're never going to get it. So you might as well just ask for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no's a tough one. Especially when you have to say no to somebody above you, right? Like if your boss asking you to do something and you're busy and you don't want to say, no, I'm busy, like what do you do? Like I'm trying to think if I've ever had to say no. Man, I might have to save that for like a because in the future I want to do short podcasts on just these specific traits and like go over stories with them. And so that might be one I build some stories on later and see if I've ever had that come up. I have said no before when I was ordered to cut my hair or shave my mustache by somebody who didn't like them. I did say no, and I could have just been like, sure, yeah, but I said no, and didn't go over too well. But obviously, the no was the right answer. It wasn't just me caving, but that's crazy there. Yeah. Did you have anything else? Or are you ready for the last part?
Yes, grit.
Yeah.
I like that one because it can get misperceived, I guess. When you say grit, like a lot of people think of like the trenches, right? Like low crawling under the barbed wire through the mud. Like, yes, that is grit. That is a huge aspect on like the physical grit, but challenging yourself with like things that you're uncomfortable, that's also grit. And a lot of people like to stay in their comfort zone because they don't want to like to keep pushing, put themselves through that grit. So that's another one I had.
Yeah, and I think grit is hard to come through nowadays with the younger generation leaders because we are tending to do something new when it gets hard. That is a huge problem I've seen with the younger generation is whenever something stressful comes up or they start to fail, right? They find something else that they're better at or that's not as hard and they go do that to be successful. There may be times where I want to see people grind through something hard. And like you said, it doesn't have to be physical. Even though I love when people go out and do physically hard things because that's a good form of grit. But if I give a task to somebody and their first response is going to be no, or I don't have the time, maybe that's a good response to begin with. But what if I'm like, I want to see you make that time? I want to see you
I don't know
because
how
I
to
may
do it.
know that.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
had a lot of people like, oh, well, I don't know how to do it, Sergeant. I'm like, okay, well, I can teach you, but I want to see you try to figure it out.
Yes. I get that all the time when
I'm guilty
I
of
have a
that
good
too.
friend of mine.
There's plenty of times that
Yeah.
I've been like, I don't know how to do it. And it's because I don't want to put in the effort to learn how to do it. So that's why I
Yep.
know that that's probably why they're doing it too. So when you're challenging others, you got to challenge yourself.
Yeah. And like it makes sense to say, I don't know, give me the answer so we can get done fast, right? Um, but grit, obviously I wrote that in there because it's a good book by Angela Ducksworth, I think her name is. And when I read it, I was like, oh, I have grit. Oh, this person has grit. We all have grit. We've had it sometime in our life, which is why I think it's cool because we all have it. It's just we don't use it as a trait. We don't think it's a leadership trait, but it is. And that ties into a hardship, right? We all have hardships. We've all come from somewhere where we struggled or where, we had to battle. That's grit. We need to use that as a leadership trait to build relationships, build care, and help get the job done. And yeah, so that's a good one there. Nice. All right. Was a book. Obviously, I love to read. I've gotten better at reading. I try to read 2 books a month. So one thing I wanted to tie into the podcast every episode is you bring a book you like. I got a couple here I'll talk about too. We got about 5 to 7 more minutes, which I think is perfect timing. So what do you got for us?
So I have Own the Day, Own Your Life. Optimize practices for waking, working, learning, eating, training, playing, sleeping, and sex by Aubrey Marcus. Aubrey Marcus is the CEO of On It. And that book was pretty good because even though it's not one of those like typical leadership books, it goes back to taking care of yourself, and it gives you a lot of small hints of like throughout the day things you can do to optimize your performance. From the moment you
Yeah,
wake
I
up,
love
instead of cracking that Alani, that energy drink, or that First Form energy drink, right? Those are my two favorites.
yeah.
Drink some water. Even better than water. Water with a little bit of lime and pink Himalayan sea salt. Like that's gonna get you super hydrated, and you're not gonna notice it immediately because you're not getting that shock of caffeine immediately. But once you start waking up, you're more clear. Like it's small things throughout the day that you can do to make your day better. And that's one thing that I struggled with. So that's one thing that I'm trying to focus on. I had this book, I read it a while back. I'm about to jump into it again because of that. Because small things that I can control to make my days better.
Yeah, I love those books where you can take things right away and implement them in your life. Those are great books that I think I think people should be reading at least one of those books a month on top of maybe like another book for like passion or hobbies or something like that. So Own Your Day, Own Your Life, perfect. I'm reading right now How to Win Friends and Influence People by Daniel Carnegie. It's a pretty good book there. And one quote that I just read from there that ties into some leadership stuff is we have to make sure it's just being hearty in approbation and lavish in my praise, which in long term is people want appreciation. They want to be acknowledged. And that is a great way to be a good leader. It ties into build relationships on trust and care. And it also ties into another quote of praise in public, criticize in private, right? That's on killing it, or I think it's on combat in that book as well. Those all sort of tie in together. If we want people to work for us very well, we need to appreciate their hard work, appreciate what they're doing, give them praise. We don't do enough praise in the world today, but we are quick to criticize on things that go wrong. Obviously, as fathers, right? I hate when I read those lines because I'm like, dang, I do that all the time, man. Like when my kids come home or they mess up or we're quick to criticize right then and there instead of praising them on the little things they do or little things people do. That's one thing right there. So that's sort of my 2 cents right there. When I read that book, I just read it a couple days ago, and every time I read those lines, I'm like, shoot. Every time something happens in life, we should either stop and be like, should we be criticizing now or praising them for their effort and then pulling them aside later to help give them feedback too? Nice. You got any last parting thoughts?
Yes, I do. You've heard me say it a million times. I think it's huge in our line of work. Be an asset, not a liability. Always try to bring
How
something
do
to
I
the
do that?
table.
How do I be an asset?
What's that?
How do I be an asset? I'll ask you that. What can I
So
do?
it's obviously going to depend on like the career, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
got to bring value. You got to bring something to the team instead of taking away time, taking away resources from the team. Everybody's going to have their own situations. We all do. But you have to make up for that by bringing value to the team. How do you do that? Maybe it's in my career, getting a little faster.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's learning a new language. Maybe it's getting online school done where you're on your degree while you're still doing this job. It's little ways of trying to get better, which ties into always learning, uh, always growing, but the constant pursuit of excellence, I guess, which is never gonna happen because we're never gonna be perfect. But the trying of trying to get better, that I think that's how you become an asset.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, just bringing something to the table is always helpful. So with that being said, if you guys want to be helpful out there and you guys took something from this, it's pretty simple. Just give it a share, give it a like, give it a follow, whatever you got to do, whatever platform you're on. This is obviously the first full one-on-one episode we've had, and it was cool, man. I love it. And so if you guys are listening and you enjoyed it, you leave a comment below. Do what you got to do. I will share Colomba's Instagram in the notes. Obviously, I'll put the book in there that we talked about as well. And then, yeah, man. Other than that,
After it,
go for it. Yeah, have an amazing day.
you too.
Go do something hard.
I'm about to go do a few things.
I appreciate it, brother.
All right, have a good
Take
one.
it easy. Later.